Hey, how's life? So we've got some stuff going on today. This one is about Star Wars and Kelly Marie Tran, the actress who played Rosie, Rose something in the movie. And I've got two articles here actually that I want to talk about. So initially I was going through headlines because one of the issues that I saw with this was that they were assuming kind of the information, and that was odd, especially in a complex area. You don't really know. If you're ever saying that a person did this because of this and just stating it as a definitive proposition, unless it's a person fell into that thing because they were hit by a car or something like that, then you really need to take stock of how much you actually know about the internal functionings of a person's brain. So the first article is called "The Harassment of Kelly Marie Tran Reflects the Worst of Star Wars Fan Base," which could be an accurate statement. Depends on what they mean by a lot of those words, but I'm sure it probably is the worst part of, or the worst of the fan base are the ones who are going to harass somebody, because not even somebody who has much of a hand in the making of the movie, but they have some legitimate gripes for sure, but you don't need to harass somebody to get that across. You can just tell them that they're not super good at what they did. So the article states, quote, "This is far from the first time one of the franchise's stars has faced harassment online," end quote. Whoa, wow. What a statement that is. Now, I have probably the smallest footprint on social media imaginable. I don't use anything. I stopped using Facebook. How many years ago? It was before I went to law school. This was like, I don't know. Wow. This is a while ago now. It's just, I stopped using it because I thought it was pointless. I barely like talking to the people who I like, that I talk to on a regular basis. So why on freaking earth would I want to include another few 100 million people who can just comment and talk to me at any given time? I don't mind. Also, I don't mind negative. I'm 100% fine with whatever abuse anybody wants to hurl at me. I'm not meaning that even hyperbolically. I 100% want people. I would rather people who want to say mean things to me than people who don't, because then I can decipher whether it's actually legitimate criticism or not, and then I can gain something out of that. I can build from it or something like that. But it's just most of conversation in general, anywhere, is just mundane nonsense. It's empty. It's vacuous. It's pointless. So that's why, and social media is just the bastion of, it's the mecca of pointless conversations. So that's why I have a very small footprint. All this to say that even with a freaking tiny footprint, I still get abused. I barely even use any of this stuff, and I still get hate comments and that sort of stuff. So and I just started this podcast, and I already get a lot of supportive stuff, but it's just, I already get people saying, rabble, and it's just, that's me. When it comes to the other side of the spectrum, where you have people who are world famous, who are engaged with conversations with millions, I looked this up. There are 900 million Twitter accounts, with the vast majority being inactive, but 300 million active daily Twitter users. 300 million people using Twitter on a daily basis. That's 300 million people who could be sending a hateful message to somebody. Wow, you just mix these things together with 300 million people. So you mix all these things together, so you've got just a wide open communication medium where somebody could say anything to you at any time. You toss in the jealousy and the fact that celebrities are a beacon of attention, and obviously, out of the percentage of 300 million active users, there are going to be people who just want to say mean things. Just in your everyday life, you're running to 10 people, and I think that was the statistic, is that 1 in 10 people have an IQ lower than 83. And I think I saw this on I haven't vetted this claim, but it was Jordan Peterson. I think I was watching something on him. He was talking about in the military when they were testing for IQ, or seeing where IQ levels put people when it came to what they could do in the military. Anybody under the IQ of 83 was a complete detriment. They could not be helpful. That's how dumb they were. They could not be helpful in any capacity. That's not to shame people who have an IQ under 83. I'm sorry. But it's just you can't get people like that to function in a way that's helpful. And if you've got, 1 in 10, 300 million of the 300 million active Twitter users, who are they just want to go on and say stupid things just for the sake of saying stupid things because they can't do any otherwise, because they're simply not smart enough to do otherwise. And you mix all those other things together, yeah, you're gonna get all that sort of stuff. Like I said, I barely have a social footprint anywhere, and yet I still get this stuff. I mean, there's no way on earth that this is not going to happen. It's simply going to happen, and it's ridiculous to expect otherwise. So, quote, while Tran has not offered any public explanation for wiping the account, she has been the subject of persistent online harassment, end quote. So here again, this is one of the issues that they're assuming that it was related to specific, not just harassment, but specifically harassment related to race and sexism. And that was the reason that she left. So I just don't like the turn here, that it's like you assume, even though she didn't say that these are the reasons she left. Now, you don't know the reason she left. She probably doesn't know the reason, given that the complexity of the way people's brains work. She doesn't necessarily know the reasons that she did the things that she did. I mean, quite obviously, it could just be the fact of she played this character. Nobody likes this character. You know, very few people like this character. Disgruntled fans were constantly saying how terrible the character is. This is something she put a lot of work into, that she, you know, had to go for a year or 2 years or whatever and meet with people and do all this acting, put everything into it that she had, and it still turned out that people didn't like it. That could be enough to push somebody off of Twitter. It could have nothing to do with racism or sexism, but they jump straight to it. And of course, if it's racism and sexism, the reasons that she left, that's perfectly fine. And that's entirely reasonable. I mean, I wouldn't care if somebody's being racist or sexist toward me or any other kind of ist, which they would have ample opportunity to do. That's perfectly fine. I either call them out or ignore them if I don't think that they have any legitimate points. But I think it's entirely reasonable to leave it from one person saying some kind of a racist thing. That's perfectly fine. It's your choice to deal with that or not deal with that, or talk to any of these idiot people or not talk to any of these idiot people. It's entirely up to you. But in this particular issue is just, I'm saying that you don't jump straight to a conclusion like that. I mean, my entire job is trying to prove what somebody was thinking when they made a decision. That's what my job is. And it's extremely difficult with all of the information you could possibly imagine. It's extremely difficult. So in this kind of a case where it's like she didn't even say, you don't get a whole bunch of information or a breakdown of everything that happened or months and months of discovery to go behind it. You don't know any of that stuff, and you're just making a determination on that basis. Again, it's perfectly fine if that was the reason, it turns out to be the reason and all that. That's perfectly fine. The writer quotes Ryan Johnson, who tweeted something about there's a difference between not liking a movie and hatefully harassing a woman so bad she had to get off social media. So he seemed to suggest that it's related to the harassment at least, which again, perfectly fine. But don't jump to that conclusion when you have no information, for one, just the fact that she left, or little information or anything like that. They'll just say that this must be the case. So it's one of those things. Anyway, so that's what Ryan Johnson said, which, Ryan Johnson, what the hell? I really liked Brick. I did. I thought Looper was a little wonky. Like, there's something a little off about it, but still looked good, and it was fun to watch, and it was a fun idea and all that stuff. But now, I'm not getting into a Star Wars review or anything like that, but just, God, there was something. And I think I had much the same, and this will go into bias and all that stuff, but I had much the same response that a lot of people had, that when they first saw episode 7 and episode 8, they were like, oh, that was pretty good. It wasn't perfect. There were a lot of things wrong with it, but that was pretty good. Because they got to see, they were annoyed at the prequels, and they got to see it kind of gritty and looked more real and all that sort of stuff. But then when they sat down and started thinking about it, then all the plot nonsense came up, and I was like, wow, that was stupid, and that was stupid, and that was really stupid, and the lack of characters came up, that all the characters were so vacuous and pointless and just symbols for whatever, just identity vessels. And then it was like, oh my God, those are actually not good. Like, those are not good movies. It's clear. Like, if you only ever watch it once, then maybe you'll just be fine with it and think it's fine. But if you watch it a couple of times, or really think about it, or sit down and break it apart, then you realize how terrible it is as a film. Just in general, if you're looking at film absent anything having to do with Star Wars, you just realize how terrible it is. So anyway, that's just a little detour. Oh yeah, it talks about John Boyega and how he responds to this idea. He talks about he dismissed the perpetrators in a New York Times interview as victims of a disease in their mind. To get into a serious dialogue with people who judge a person based on the melanin in their skin, they're stupid, and I'm not going to lose sleep over people. End quote. Exactly. Yes, that's exactly how you treat it. With any large population, you're going to have that fringe group of terrible people who are going to do terrible things just for the sake of doing terrible things. It's like criticizing, the entire population of Florida because some X percentage of the population is engaging in criminal activity. It's like you don't say, oh my gosh, throw your hands up, let's not engage with Florida because this percentage of the population engaged in criminal activity. You say, okay, well, we need to extricate ourselves from those people and just deal with the people who are fine or good or great or whatever else. And that's what he... Like, everybody recognizes and acknowledges the fact that, we even have a term for people who just say bad things to get attention. Trolls, we have the term, and we say, don't feed the trolls. We have that. That idea is already out there. The meme has traversed the online world. So it's really weird to see people get up in arms about it. It's so strange. And it's having a new medium like Twitter that gives you such direct communicative access to everybody that we just aren't capable of dealing with it. If people came up to your face every day and said all these things, it would be weird. But also it would be weird if you were talking to 300 million people every day, then it would be like, okay, that's expected. It's like I talked to 100 million people. I said this thing to them. They didn't respond at all. And then 2 people said, you're a stupid idiot and I hate you. So it's like, it would make more sense that way, but it doesn't make sense. So we're trying to understand it in this. There's a difference between, and we've always known this and can recognize it very, very clearly, that there's a difference between sincere criticism, even if harsh, and attention-seeking criticism. Like, we should be able to parse these things out extremely easily at this point in our development. Then the writer criticizes, says, in addition to garden variety racism and sexism, Tran is also targeted by fans who specifically dislike her character and storyline, as though she somehow be held personally responsible. She should somehow be held personally responsible. Wow. My mouth is just racing today. It just wants to get all this stuff out. It doesn't have enough time to do it. So the idea here is that, she shouldn't be criticized based on the movie because she didn't write the movie, she didn't direct the movie. So there's, of course, some degree of justification in that statement. It's like, no, she didn't write it, she didn't direct it, and there are plenty reasons to criticize on those bases. There is, of course, legitimate reason to be able to criticize her, and we don't know what percentage are legitimately criticizing her versus unjustly criticizing her, and we don't know what combination of those are the things that made her leave, or what combination of those things would be justified in making her leave, or if it was just legitimate criticism and she left, would we say that, how could you legitimately criticize her and then have her leave? It's your fault, you're terrible. I don't know. I think, she didn't seem like much of an actress. She didn't add much to the character. She wasn't particularly charismatic or anything like that. So I think people have legitimate grievances when it comes to her work in this film. I'm sure she worked hard, and I'm sure she, was happy with her performance when it was done and all that sort of stuff. But, people get to criticize your artwork. That's the way it works. So on the other side, if people are saying that, how could you make the character say that thing? Then, okay, well, she doesn't deserve that criticism. Or how could you decide that the character was going to have those characteristics? I'm sure she had very little control over any of that, especially with Disney involved. And that's kind of funny. I'm doing this Disney thing just as Disney is being more demonized for the nonsense they're putting out. So curious. Anyway, so that's what went on with the first article. Hey, this one's running a little long with 2 articles, so I split it into 2 parts. So this is going to be part 1, and the second article is going to be part 2, where we really get into it and do the labbing for the whole thing. All right, thanks. So the second article, it's called Star Wars Doesn't Belong to You, a message to the men harassing Kelly Marie Tran. Of course, it just assumes that only men are harassing her. Is it not possible for a woman to have said something that was racist, or said something that was just harassing in general, or said something that was a legitimate criticism that the actress took as harassing, or said a legitimate criticism that the actress was fine with taking? Who knows? Because this, of course, suggests that only the men are the ones who are going to do something like this. It talks about history of diversity in Star Wars, and this is a huge area that drives me absolutely insane, because I think it is internally inconsistent and causing more harm than anything, because it wants to tally the number of identities that are represented in a given film, TV show, and in Hollywood at large. Okay, let's tally them up based on skin color and based on gender. So it talks about, okay, then came Rogue One with an incredibly diverse cast, and then The Last Jedi with Rose, a main character who was neither white nor male, something incredibly uncommon in Hollywood. Okay. If you say there's some substantive value in hiring someone because of their race or gender, you are saying there is a substantive difference between people of different races or genders. So if you're giving value to the fact that you're picking somebody on the basis of race or gender, then you're saying there is a difference. You're saying there's something substantially different between those two things, between race 1 and race 2, or gender 1 and gender 2. That's the problem. You're constantly saying that while saying the opposite too. Is that, no, they should be included because they're the same, but also they're different, so they should be included. It's insane. It doesn't make any sense. Like, if you're trying to assert that there's a substantive difference between having a person of one race versus a person of another race in a given role, then you're saying there's a substantive difference between those people on the basis of their race. I don't know how else to even describe it. I would love to break it down more. If I have something that's specifically about this later, then I'll break it down more. But one way I wanted to kind of structure it is that, okay, so if we're talking about what's acceptable socially when it comes to verbal hostility, if we wanted to structure something around that idea and that concept, then what we would look at, and I would love to deliberately do this instead of just have it be all up in the air, who knows, but we would have a spectrum where the least changeable things, like height or skin color, are the most sacred that shouldn't be criticized on that basis. Now, of course, ask Rachel Dolezal when it comes to skin color. You have a spectrum, and followed by that are things that are more changeable, like religion. It's not the most changeable because somebody's usually grows up in a religion, their family's religious, etc. So there's a lot of pressure and all that sort of stuff. So it's less changeable, but still changeable. So it would be followed by that you criticize that to a lesser degree or less hostilely or whatever else. And then more changeable things like politics or food preference, those could be the most attacked without having issues. So if we want to talk about kind of a hostility spectrum, verbal hostility spectrum, then that's what it would look like structurally. If we were looking at it kind of objectively and we were saying that this is the way that we need to interact, we could establish this spectrum and say that, okay, so when you're criticizing the things at the left side of the spectrum, you have to be most careful. When you're criticizing at the right, you don't have to be careful at all. You can say whatever you want about somebody's food preferences, but you shouldn't say whatever you want about somebody's skin color. So now beyond that, the important thing is that there are categories, and everything in that category has the same impact. So things that you can't change, like your height or skin color, should have the same impact. One thing that people always try to trot in just automatically is everything about history. But history should be irrelevant when it comes to this kind of idea and the spectrum of verbal hostility. What's acceptable verbal hostility? But anyway, history should be irrelevant because what we're looking at in tort law, they have this idea called eggshell theory. That if somebody is walking down your negligently maintained hallway or something like that, or we'll just make it a aisle, just for everybody knows that story. So your negligently maintained aisle, if they're walking down that and they fall over and they break every bone in their body because they have brittle bones, like that avian bone girl from 30 Rock, because they have brittle bones, they fall, they break everything in their body. You're responsible for all that. Even if somebody who didn't have brittle bone, avian bone syndrome, if they had fallen and there would have been no injury, you're still responsible for everything that happens to the person who had the avian bone syndrome. That's not how it should be when it comes to social verbal hostility and the spectrum of that. We shouldn't be saying that, okay, well, so if you say something about egg salad or something in some case, and a girl's like, my mother used to throw egg salad at me, and don't make fun of egg salad. And so we treat that the same as if somebody had made fun of something at the other side of the spectrum. That's what history is. That's where history fits within this concept, is that that's subjective, kind of a subjective approach to something that should be an objective structure. So the subjective is, okay, well, I feel extra sensitive about this particular topic, so therefore everybody has to conform to my sensitivity. That's not how verbal hostility should be structured, because then it's just, we don't have any kind of a common language or understanding about what that is. We just say that everybody is their own island and we have no way to talk to anybody, because anything that we could possibly say to any person could potentially be that nuclear attack, when we meant it as, a light jab on the arm or something like that. So we need some kind of a really structured idea about what this means. And obviously, when it comes to speech in general, if you listen to any of my other podcasts, it should have come through that this isn't related to like what the government should do related to speech. I think the government should back off and not have anything to do with regulating speech. The only thing under constitutional law that is barred or affected, it has nothing, no hate speech isn't a concept under constitutional law. The only thing that is barred is calling for imminent harm. So if it's something that could cause imminent harm, that's what you're concerned about, and that's physical harm, not psychological harm. Although when it comes to intentional infliction of emotional distress and that sort of stuff, you could be civilly liable for some of that stuff in various contexts, but whatever, we won't get into that. But the point is that we need some kind of a objective structure, and I don't mind, when we're talking about verbal hostility, I don't mind have some kind of a gentleman or gentle person's agreement that we have this structure, and on one spectrum on the things that we're more careful about criticizing, on the other spectrum we don't care about how we criticize it. That's perfectly fine. And so I came a long way from just talking about diversity in the cast, deliberate diversity in a cast. Yeah, I think it's absolutely crazy to explicitly demarcate people based on their skin color for purposes of this kind of a thing. In the next part, the author says, we already know that pop culture needs to do a better job of reflecting the world around it. Why? Why does it have to do that? And to what extent? Should it reflect white diversity as well? White people aren't all one homogenous group. There are Italians, there are people from Nordic countries, there are the French, there are English, etc., etc. South Africans. I mean, should we be trying to make sure that everybody's represented in that? And why don't people go to like China or Africa and demand white inclusion? Why is there not more white representation there when it comes to media? Additionally, okay, what is the proper, what are all the particulars of the correct representation? Like, would it just be, okay, this is the current census, this is how many people of any given skin color, and therefore any given movie that's going to come out or any TV show or whatever else has to have that structure. There's a story on the website that I put on there. It's called The Perfect Movie, and it deals with this, where somebody's about to direct a movie and he's told that, okay, no, we need to be more inclusive, and then it's taken to its logical conclusion of what conclusivity would mean. So, and how do you do this? Do you coordinate? Do like producers and casting agents coordinate with each other to make sure that everybody gets representation? Because any given movie, if you have one movie and there are only 3 characters, then there are more than 3 nationalities, more than 3, different kinds of people in the country. And is it based on the countries or based on the world? Is that what you're basing your diversity on? But say it's the country, if there are only 3 characters, then how do you do that? How do you split that baby? And how do you coordinate with other producers, like say that I only have 3 characters and they're like, no, sorry, I'm hiring an Asian person for this role, so that totals their 4.7% of the population. We've already got that for this year. Do you break it down in a year? Do you break it down over 10 years? Do you break it down over a week? What do you do? Just each movie that comes out? What if you have more movies some years versus other years? No, you have to find somebody from Nepal. We don't have enough Nepalese people being represented. And it's like, what are you talking about? I mean, just think about how this breaks down. These are all individuals who are on their own initiative going out there and making movies. They're writing movies, they're directing movies, they're producing movies, whatever else. They're going out there, they're having a bunch of ideas they want to get across, and they're being told that you have to do it in a certain way because of social whatever. But it's incredibly shocking. It was Chief Justice John Roberts. So Roberts, specifically, it was in an affirmative action case that came down from the Supreme Court. He was in the dissent, and he said, the best way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. ways. It's shocking that awarding jobs on the basis of identity, especially in the entertainment industry, is supposed to be seen as the next step in fairness. I mean, that's insane to me. So not only that, but as I was talking about, how would it functionally work? After that, they talk about it's important that film and TV represent the diversity of the people watching it because it makes audience better able to empathize with others because it influences how we see the world and because people of color, women, queers, and non-binary folk exist and deserve to see themselves on screen just as much as straight white men do. No, they don't. Nobody deserves any particular kind of movie or representation in movies. Like, these are individuals who are making whatever they want to make and putting their money and their effort and their time and everything else into this. No particular group or all the groups or anybody else, nobody deserves any kind of movie to represent their identity. That's absolutely insane. So who decides whether I deserve a film that better reflects me? You know, I would love that the Transformers films had a bunch of stuff about Nietzsche in it. You know, I would love that. That would better reflect me. So maybe they should have gone and changed that. What are you talking about? So who makes it? Who finances it? Who writes it? Who's responsible for reflecting my vanity on screen? Where does that come from? This also reinforces the idea that it is perfectly okay to only empathize with people who look like you. It's saying that no, we need more representation of people who look different ways so people who look different ways can empathize with them. So it's saying that, yeah, it's okay. Just look for people who look like you. That's what you need to empathize with. Not that everybody needs to empathize with anybody else and, I don't know, maybe pick something other than race as the basis for empathy, you know, like, I don't know, something more complex or substantive, like the way they think, the way they act, their politics, intellectual endeavors, whatever else. Maybe empathize on that basis or the things that they go through, the struggles they have to deal with, instead of just this person looks kind of like me. That's crazy. And it's not. This idea, this appropriation of every aspect of society to get across your political whatever, it's not the responsibility of artists to shepherd some diffuse idea of morality based on identity. That's not their responsibility. That's not what they're there to do. They're there to make whatever they want to make and see if somebody wants to pay them for it. That's what they're there to do. It's not their responsibility to shepherd this idea in because some vague person somewhere thinks that it's the right thing to be doing at this moment, you know, notwithstanding whatever your project is supposed to be about or how it could finance or anything else. Can you imagine this in any other area? It's like bankers, they're doing their job. They have to make sure that when they're giving loans out, that they have to pick people that reflect the population in general. You know, it's not based on the numbers. It's based on, okay, what's your identity? Okay, you can have some money. That's crazy. Or in Subway, so somebody a white person walks up to a Subway counter and the Subway person is like, oh, I'm sorry. No, we serve too many white people today. I'm sorry. We're really looking for Native Americans right now. What are you talking about? And so if your population is homogenous, you know, like numerous countries are around the world, you know, it's not like the United States. We all love to look at it through our lens, but there are a lot of homogenous countries out there. So should they then only reflect their population? Is that what it would be? Is that how it would come down and break down? That they only reflect their selves and don't hire anybody who's outside of that because they're homogenous? That's what would follow logically from this idea that it needs to reflect the population. Another part of the article, harassment and bullying is not a new phenomenon in Star Wars fandom. Jake Lloyd and Hayden Christensen were torn apart by fans for their depictions of Anakin Skywalker in the prequel trilogy. Both retreated from acting, in part because of the abuse they received. In parentheses, a note, while they were also treated terribly, they avoided the blatant racism and sexism Tran was subject to. Do you see this? Do you see this? Now, first, the writer added, in part because of the abuse they received. Both retreated from acting in part, quote, in part because of the abuse they received. So it takes it back a notch that it's not because of the abuse, but it's in part because of the abuse. Now, I don't know, they don't reference any other information, but that to me seems like it's trying to scale it back, you know? Maybe, you know, it's partially the abuse, but it was also because they wanted to open a Denny's, you know? It's Like, all right, come on. But also there's a note, like I said, in parentheses to make sure it's there. While they were treated terribly, they avoided the blatant racism and sexism Tran was subject to. So do you see what's happening here? This is the state of our discourse, is that they're explicitly subjugating the victimhood of Jake Lloyd and Hayden Christensen because they didn't have enough victim points. They're making a hierarchy of victimhood. Like, they could have just said that it was a terrible thing that happened to Jake Lloyd and Hayden Christensen. Not only that, why wouldn't the outrage scale with the damage in the particular case of online harassment for playing a role? I mean, you have two pretty close cases here that one person was harassed and left social media. One person was harassed and left acting. Another person was harassed and left acting and engaged in criminal activity. I mean, what are you talking about? So it doesn't scale with what actually happened to those people as a result of harassment. It's just, okay, check off the victim points. They don't have enough victim points, therefore it's not as important. And I'm just kind of shoving your harassment and things that happen to you under the rug because of your identity. That is terrible. That is the wrong way that we should be thinking about these things. And then we have Rian Johnson calling people man babies, just the hardcore Star Wars fans who are complaining about stuff, calling them man babies. And I wonder, okay, name calling, when's it okay? When's it not okay? And then the author says, but it doesn't matter how many times you watch the original trilogy or how well you know the expanded universe, Star Wars doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to me either. It belongs to all of us. That's what she says. So it belongs to all of us, and we need to learn how to share it. And this concept of who a movie belongs to, what kind of craziness is this? So obviously, it's got the dichotomy of it doesn't belong to you, but it also belongs to you. It doesn't belong to you, it doesn't belong to me, but it belongs to all of us. What does that mean? What on earth does that mean? If the movie came out and it had a bunch of white men in all the major roles, then you would have said, it doesn't belong to me. This is not what I want in a Star Wars movie, so therefore, it doesn't belong to me. Just like on the other side, these guys, I already assume they're guys, the people criticizing Star Wars, if they're people saying that, no, because instead of making great characters and having a fun story and an adventure that you get lost in because it seems realistic and all the lead characters are charismatic and all that stuff, instead of doing that, it's just effectuating an agenda. That's why it doesn't belong to me. So that's why I'm complaining that there's a problem with it. Do you see the two sides here? So who's right? Who gets to say that this is what it is and this is what it's not? Why isn't it wrong for you to say that no, it should be effectuating this agenda? Why can't they say that no, it doesn't belong to you? This isn't what it should be about. It should be about the fun story and the charismatic leads and all that stuff. Who gets to say which is the balance? Obviously, who does it really belong to? It belongs to Disney. Disney gets to do whatever the hell they want with it. They just have to suffer the consequences if they don't make something good. And in so far, wow. I mean, the things that made, and this is what a lot of the criticism would say, is that there were things that made Star Wars great and made Star Wars Star Wars. You know, there are things that Star Wars shares with other kinds of movies and other movies in general, but there are things that made Star Wars special and great. And those things included the quality characters and the adventure kind structure of it, the actual world that it was built in, because the world seemed to just grow on its own and build on its own. I mean, I can say from personal perspective, the things that I loved about Star Wars when I was a kid, it was the charisma of the characters, it being, a space opera, being set in space and being large in that way, and the lightsabers. I mean, those were the things that I really liked about Star Wars, that made Star Wars Star Wars. And it was that world that drew me back to it when I played games, Knights of the Old Republic and all that kind of stuff. It was that world that lived on its own that you can populate with different characters, and it was enjoyable. It was like you could see the moving parts of the world working together, and that's where George Lucas, he was a great storyteller in that, at least. He's a good storyteller. He's not a great director or writer, but he's a good storyteller. So, and he built this world, he's a good world builder as well. Even around Indiana Jones, he's a good world builder. The things that are missing from these new Star Wars movies is the world building. These movies are just Rogue One, Episode 7, Episode 8. These movies are generic, not very good movies branded with Star Wars. That's what they are. They don't really have anything Star Wars-y. They don't really establish that thing that made Star Wars great. And that's the big issue that a lot of people have with these movies. So who's to say, okay, well, like I said, it's owned by Disney. They get to do whatever they want. But any fan who says this is missing the things that make Star Wars Star Wars, I mean, it's entirely justified. they can say that as much as anybody wants to say that, no, I like this direction of Star Wars, that I like it, that it's trying to establish a social consciousness, or it's trying to effectuate a social agenda instead of just being a movie, a space opera. That's the friggin' article. I know I went a little off the deep end. It drives me absolutely crazy. And I wish I could lay it out. If this was only about the idea of inclusivity when it comes to media, then it would be a lot easier. There's a lot more to lay out and structure so that it's clear exactly what this really means. But I tried to do what I could in this little chunk. So when it comes to the analysis, let's look into it. My limitations. So for and when we talk about limitations, we're talking about, okay, what kind of qualifications do I have to be talking about this, and what are we actually talking about? What are the propositions being levied here in this piece that I'm trying to levy, and that they're trying to levy, just so I can know what I'm responding to and what my limitations mean for what I'm trying to put across here. So for all the vitriol in these two pieces, they actually have little to argue. They don't argue much. The first one is kind of arguing that the departure of the actress was likely due to harassment, but also likely due to racism and sexism. And again, there's no categorical difference between like racism and sexism and disliking somebody because of the way they look or something like that. There's no categorical difference between those things. So if you say you are worth less because your face does not conform to my ideas of beauty or social norms of beauty, that should be as horrible as somebody saying that it's because of your sex, your gender. And of course, gender's a whole nother thing, because apparently you can flip a switch and change your gender. So if you can change it that easily, then it shouldn't, on the spectrum, it should be moving down the spectrum toward the right. So it's one of those things that you can fun of or criticize somebody on the basis of, or whatever else. So the second article argues popular culture must reflect the population, and that harassment is different for different groups, and that Star Wars doesn't belong to anyone but belongs to everyone. And obviously I find all this just mind-boggling. So popular culture, that's the term, pop culture was the term used in the article. But okay, so every aspect of pop culture, so this is music, this is TV, this is what would include advertising, would it include painting? Like if somebody's going to be painting subjects, then all the subjects have to reflect, the population. It has to include everybody. I find this crazy. Obviously, the number one position, and obviously in my work, the number one position is that nobody should be disadvantaged on the basis of one of these protected classes. That shouldn't be the case. But that doesn't mean that there's suddenly going to be an equal number of meritorious applicants at every job, in every context, for every loan, and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't mean that's going to be the case. We just have to figure out, okay, if you're doing it on the basis of race, if you're rejecting somebody or choosing somebody else or whatever else, then that's a problem. That's illegal, and that is protected by all sorts of statutes. If you're doing it for some other reason, then okay. The problem with this is that you have no idea whatsoever in whatever context this is being applied, but this author is simply saying that, no, it has to be the case, period, done. I don't know anything about any of the context. I don't have any information. I don't know why these people are choosing not to hire or to hire whatever else, people of various disparate races and genders, but I'm just saying that, no, this has to be the case, period. That's a problem. That's extremely questionable. But not only that, but there's a difference apparently. It doesn't matter what the result is, but you have to add up the victim points, and when it comes to harassment on one end that causes a certain thing, harassment on the other end that causes less of an impact but it has more victim points, that's more important, and that's extremely questionable. And Star Wars doesn't belong to anyone, but belongs to everyone. What the hell does that mean? Who the hell knows what that means? Nobody has a responsibility to make some movie that reflects your identity. Nobody has that responsibility. If you want to go do that, if you want to go make a movie that reflects your personality, then great. If you can get people to fund it, then great. Then go ahead, have at it. But no, absolutely not. So when it comes to the anchor, my limitations, so all this talk just to say that, okay, this is mostly philosophical, but it involves very complex questions related to representation. So obviously I don't know the millions of interactions and reasons that people are choosing to do one thing over the other thing. So I have to have some weight against it for that. But this is primarily opinion, primarily philosophical. So as long as my premises work with each other well, then I don't have to worry too much about the concern. It's just the back end of it are these concepts related to representation and entertainment and all sorts of stuff, because this author brought in a whole bunch of vague concepts that I'm responding to. So the anchor has to be relatively weighty, and I decided to use a ton as the measuring stick for purposes of the Socratic anchor. So this would be like 800 pounds. Obviously a ton is 2,000 pounds. So this would be like 800 pounds because it's about philosophy and all that stuff. And I just have to make sure my premises are congruent and make sense and consistent. But there's also attached to that all this other stuff on the back end that I might have spouted off certain propositions that aren't well supported or whatever else. So I need weighing down on my confidence, 800. That's pretty hefty. That it's going to weigh down on my confidence for whatever propositions I've levied against any of the propositions in the two articles. So bias, biographical, I'm male, so that could bias me that I just want to reassert the patriarchy. This comes up a lot. I'm going to continue to be male for as long as I know. I'm relatively comfortable and employed. I'm employed right now, so being in that position might make me less likely to be inclined to support something that uplifts the, quote, oppressed, end quote. So that could be impacting that I'm in a posture of, look, I did it, so why doesn't everybody else do it? And that's a distinct possibility for bias, area for bias, because that's what you want to reflect yourself out in the world. So it's really easy for somebody to say that because of my parochial understanding of the way the world works, you can just work harder and be able to do everything that I did. Stop whining. I was wondering, actually, something came up. I was just wondering, can victims make bad choices? Like, where do bad choices end and where does oppression begin? So, like, the oppressors you see as, yes, they're complete agents. They make all their choices. So the victims, can they make bad choices? Or is it all just a result of oppression? That's just a thought I had. I don't have any follow-up to that. Biases, other intellectual. Yeah, when it comes to storytelling in general, I've got this idea of false world theory when it comes to, because films and other types of media like that, they are built around an artifice. They're artificial. And usually there's a character and you build a world around a character, and the art of filmmaking is making it seem like that world was not built around that character. It's that it's a living world and the character's functioning within that living world. And so it could bias me because I think this is a very powerful way to look at the way films are structured, and these films fail miserably when it comes to this idea. So that could bias me against them, and want to, in turn want me to support criticism of these two articles. In closing, so those are the concerns when it comes to my propositions here. But, it's not the world's responsibility to police fringe attention seekers to the extent it emotionally impacts somebody else. It's not the world's responsibility. And, our speech is free. And just to levy a couple of quotes from a roughly 2,000-year-old wise man, quote, "Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil," end quote. And secondly, quote, "Reject your sense of injury and the injury itself disappears," end quote. So I think those are important ideas to keep in mind when we're talking about how we should be communicating verbal hostility in the modern era. Okay, thank you very much. And if you want to send me some hostility, if you want to get some verbal hostility off your chest, then feel free. You can email me at thelastcoffeehouse@gmail.com. If something in there is particularly relevant, then I'll be happy to bring it up. And if you're right, obviously I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to crucify myself audibly or through, because I should be correct. Anything that I'm proposing, any proposition I'm levying, I should be correct. And of course, when I'm extemporaneously talking about these, I have some notes, but when I'm talking about these things extemporaneously, it is difficult to make sure that everything is defined properly and that I'm walking down the structure of whatever my argument is in an effective way. So absolutely, any criticism that I get that is correcting me on something, I will be happy to bring it up. You can also go to the Facebook page, The Last Coffee House, or tweet at me. Like I said, I never use it. Coffee Chat LCH. I'll see whatever pops up. Anything that somebody sends to me, I'm happy to look at. But anyway, I greatly appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, week, whatever. Thanks. Bye.